I'm Mark Golub. Thank you again for joining us for Shalom TV's ongoing exclusive American television coverage of Israel in turmoil as the IDF engages in a defensive action in Gaza, seeking to stop Hamas from its rocket assault of aggression against the State of Israel. And Hamas continues to refuse to bring the conflict to an end. Hamas continues to reject any ceasefire proposal put forth by the Arab League, by Egypt, by the international community. And no American should miss this point. Israel has accepted 2 ceasefire agreements. Israel even suspended its operations in Gaza in keeping with the first ceasefire, which the Israeli cabinet accepted despite overwhelming Israeli popular sentiment that Israel should continue Operation Protective Edge until Hamas's ability to resume a rocket assault on Israel is completely destroyed. But despite Israeli popular opinion being against a ceasefire, the Israeli cabinet voted for a ceasefire. Hamas refused. Hamas has refused 2 ceasefire agreements, insisting on shelling Israeli units until all of their demands, all of Hamas's demands, are met, including the release of Hamas prisoners arrested by Israel in the aftermath of the kidnap and murder of 3 Israeli teens, an end to Israel's blockade of Gaza, and millions of dollars for Hamas to use to pay its employees. But none of us should miss the bottom line. Hamas does not want to stop its war against Israel. Hamas does not want to stop its war against Israel. And as we reported yesterday, Hamas attacks on Israel are having ancillary consequences that affect other aspects of Israeli life, including air travel to and from Israel and the tourism industry, which is an important component of the Israeli economy. Delta Airlines was the first international carrier to divert a plane from Israel and made it land in Paris instead. The reason? A Hamas rocket fell close to Ben Gurion Airport, and Delta became wary of possible dangers to a Delta plane, especially in the aftermath of the terrible tragedy over Ukraine, when a rocket brought down a Malaysia passenger aircraft, killing all 298 people on board. One report suggested that Delta was worried that rocket debris on the runway might hamper landing or takeoff. As far as we know, there is no debris on any Israeli airport airstrip. And then soon after Delta diverted its plane, other major American airlines canceled their trips to Israel altogether, and the FAA even banned U.S. flights to Israel. While, by the way, the U.S. Embassy in Israel shut down the office that issues visas to Israelis wishing to travel to the United States, on the grounds that it was too dangerous for Israelis to stand in line outdoors waiting for visas. There are many people who are going out of their way now to say it is perfectly safe to travel to Israel. One of them is the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, who posted this message on his Facebook page. This evening I will be flying on El Al to Tel Aviv to show solidarity with the Israeli people and to demonstrate that it is safe to fly in and out of Israel. And by the way, leave this up for 1 second. There is a mistake in this Facebook page, because in the actual Facebook page, and I love this, Michael Bloomberg signed it Mike Bloomberg, not Michael. His official name is Michael Bloomberg. Everybody calls him Mayor Michael Bloomberg. But on his Facebook, he just, Mike Bloomberg told us all. He's going to Israel. By the way, we also have a clip of his basically making the same comment. I'd like to show you the clip of Mike Bloomberg.
Sure, take the flight. It's safe and it's efficient and it's a great way to travel. And El Al's a great airline. We have a lot of American airlines that are great too. And I just want them all to be able to fly around the world and land safely and in peace.
What are you trying to prove by going there today?
I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to show that it's safe and it's a great place to visit. And Israel has a right to defend its people, and they're doing exactly what they should be doing.
Good for him. Good for Mike Bloomberg. Very impressive. Well, how's Israel weathering this airplane storm? For some insight, we're joined now on our phones by a very special man who's involved in the entire work having to do with the industry of tourism in the state of Israel. And it's my pleasure to welcome into Shalom TV Uri Steinberg, who heads the North American desk at the Ministry of Tourism. Uri, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Good night from Tel Aviv, from quiet Tel Aviv.
Is it a quiet night, Uri?
It actually is. It's been quiet for the last 48 hours here in Tel Aviv. Yeah, you know, people are walking down the street. If you go to Rothschild Avenue, one of the most bustling and busy streets in the city, you will see people sitting in cafes. Maybe it's the Israeli nature, maybe it's just the true nature of the city, because things are relaxed and easygoing, very different than what you will see on the evening news and on every American station, or most American stations.
All right, talk to me a moment about the airline industry, what seems to be almost like an airline embargo from the United States. Number one, how do you, as head of the North American desk at the Ministry of Tourism, and you're in Tel Aviv as we speak again, as you described a moment ago. So what's it mean to you at the Ministry of Tourism that the United States FAA is telling planes it should not fly to Israel?
It's very dramatic. Unfortunately, it is very dramatic for several reasons. First one is the fact that, like in other cases, in other fields, Europeans and other continents tend to copycat what they see from the United States. So once the FAA decided what it decided, other European airlines followed, and then other Asian airlines followed, and after 12 hours, we had only 3 airlines left flying to Israel, when a day before that we had 90. So that was definitely a dramatic landslide. And I think besides that, even if, you know, tomorrow night the FAA decides to stop
Lift
this
the ban, yes.
You have, I think, a dramatic and unfair image issue that we will have to deal with, because the world knows now that Israel is a dangerous place to fly. And mind you, there are not a lot of places in the world that suffer from such a dramatic ban, like, you know, a non-flight zone. So I think on the long haul, we will have to rebuild the image of this country from scratch. Well, not from scratch, but from a lower point than we were due to this unfortunate decision.
Okay. I want you to give me a realistic assessment. As a plane either lands or takes off from Ben Gurion Airport, do you ever worry that Hamas is going to shoot a rocket at it? By the way, it looks like Hamas can't aim a rocket anywhere. But do you worry? We had the terrible situation over Ukraine of the Malaysia airline being brought down. These were not by the equivalent of Hamas rockets, but I think everybody is sort of, you know, edgy and wary. Do you personally think it is at all possible that Hamas could take a plane down either on landing or takeoff?
Oh, not at all. I think that there are just no chances to it whatsoever. But you mentioned Ukraine, the plane that was shot down over Ukraine. I think that's the right context to relate to this whole thing. I think if it wasn't for this incident, I think we would not be talking right now.
Yes.
This incident, together with the rocket that fell incidentally fell several miles from Ben Gurion Airport, started this whole thing, and that we're suffering from right now. I have to say that from a cold insurance perspective, you know, taking under consideration the fact that a plane was shut down, and the fact that that everyone is so hysterical about what's happening in the world right now. Such a decision is not completely wild. But the problem is that once a decision like that was made, it's very hard to convince people to kind of come down to planet Earth from where they are right now and to see things through in a realistic way, to think about what are the actual odds for such a thing to happen. And the problem is that there is some sort of a political statement that is also involved with it. Some sort of a technical, professional decision makes a very powerful statement in a military conflict now that is happening. And this, I don't think that this was the intention. I think the intention was for a professional, cold decision. But everyone in the world is now talking about the fact that Israel is one of the most dangerous places on earth, where, again, Rothschild Avenue here is just full of people who are sitting outside in cafes.
Mm-hmm. I'm uncomfortable even as I talk to you, Uri, because I'm worrying that although I'm giving you a chance to tell us why Israel is safe, the very fact that we're on television now discussing this may suggest to some people who don't hear your answer well that in some way I'm suggesting or that we're suggesting that it isn't safe. At the same time, I think it's very important that you get to answer what I read online and also hear every now and then in the American media. And what we read, it's amazing how misinformation becomes fact, Yuri. We know that the internet, for all of its enormous good, spreads enormous misinformation. So the very first story was that there was rocket debris on a runway in Ben Gurion, which would have interfered with a plane's landing. Now the question is, these rockets are flying over Israel. We never know where they're going. If somebody were to say to you, Uri, although it may be a small chance, what happens if a Hamas rocket, by accident, ends up crashing onto Ben Gurion runway? What then happens to planes that are trying to land? If a question is asked of you in that way, what answer do you want America to hear?
First of all, this is a very delicate time for us as people who are trying to be the ambassadors for this country, because we have to remain, at the end of the day, reliable. We cannot paint a completely a pink picture of what's happening here. We cannot say to the world that Israel now is like Israel that existed 3 weeks ago. That will not be correct. Of course, there is a huge distance between that and the way that Israel is being portrayed on the media. I would definitely say, and I flew into Israel a week ago with Air France, French company, and but there are some methods in which the pilots work in order to make sure that when they come to land, there is no warning of whatsoever, and that there's no rockets that are falling down. Planes do not just land incidentally; they land after they coordinate with the relevant authorities. And every plane that lands does not land when rockets are falling down and when sirens are going off. So there's no problem whatsoever over there. However, I think that we need to prepare for the day after the operation, and I think that we, as a country who's trying to brand itself as a safe country, we need to say, yes, this is a safe country. But on the other hand, I do understand that when people want to have a good time, when people want to enjoy this beautiful country that we have, that may be time of tension, that may be time where they may be spending good times in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but it's not the perfect time. I think that we need to be reliable. I think that we need to convey a message saying, we're here, we're safe, but wait for the day it ends, and we'll be back on business, we'll be back on our feet, we'll be back to be what you used to know 4 weeks ago. And people are trying to portray a message where everything is the same. I think that will be a mistake in terms of image.
Mm-hmm. But you say you said beautifully, and this is what I hope, that this conflict will come to an end very, very soon, and that there will be an explosion of tourism, and everybody will want to get on a plane and walk the streets of Tel Aviv and walk the streets of Israel, everywhere, up and down the entire country. And I thank you for a few moments of your time. I will stay with you, if you don't mind, and see how this story plays out. Right now, I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, all the best to you, your family, and all your friends in Israel. We are all with you. Uri Steinberg, thank you very, very much. Be well.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Uri Steinberg, head of the North American desk at the Ministry of Tourism. There are others on the American Jewish scene who are reacting to the this kind of FAA ban on flights to Israel, including the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. And here to comment on the conference's activities, we're most pleased to welcome once again the Executive Vice Chairman of the President's Conference, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Malcolm, the conference published a statement today directed at the FAA. Summarize it for us.
What essentially we said is that the FAA did not need to take such a drastic action given the facts that are known. We know that a rocket fell a mile away from the airport, but by issuing a ban, they are encouraging Hamas to fire onto the Ben Gurion airport, that it will give them a victory. Even the ban is a victory that they can then go to their people and say, listen, we shut down American air traffic into the Ben Gurion, into Israel. And people have to understand, and I know you just had Uri Steinberg and you have had others on talking about the importance of tourism, but it goes beyond the fact that hotels are empty and restaurants are empty. The suppliers, therefore, don't get to sell. The workers aren't employed. They don't come into work because either their transportation is difficult or because there are no customers. So it's the secondary and tertiary impact beyond just empty hotel rooms that will hit Israel's economy very hard. And people now book for the winter may be hesitant to do so and consider putting it off to another year. These things have a real impact economically, politically, but also psychologically, that when the streets are empty and the people of Israel feel alone, feel abandoned, feel isolated, it compounds the tragedies that they have to endure and the challenges with which they are coping. They've done an amazing job. The support for this war is 80%. The people, despite the losses which impact every single Israeli and most of us, has not diminished their determination and their commitment. It's the most amazing demonstration of courage and conviction about the significance of what the Army is doing now and standing with them as they do it so professionally and with such care, despite the media distortions and misrepresentations. So we urged the FAA to reconsider the ban. They did not today. They have extended it for another 24 hours, but we hope that, like British Airways, which is flying into Israel, that American Airlines will be able to do so. And I assure you that the Israeli officials would not let planes come in if they think that it's going to pose a danger to them.
By the way, you've flown in and out of Ben Gurion during this crisis. You've had no trouble. I
flew in and out 3 times already in the last 3 weeks and never had a problem, and I don't believe others would have a problem. Again, Israel will take the steps necessary to assure that nothing happens, or if they are concerned that something will happen, they will make sure that that airlines aren't put in danger. They have a southern airport that people can go to. There are other steps that can be taken, and you know that Israeli planes are equipped to deal with certain challenges. So we urge the FAA to lift the ban. Warnings are appropriate, other things are appropriate, but not things that interfere with people going, and that those who made a decision to go are being barred from doing so because of this measure. I would say also, we put out another statement today that I think is also important.
Yes, I want to get to it. I want to progress that. Hold off on one moment before you talk about the other.
I think I have a third one.
If you have one that I don't know about, I want you to talk about the one you know about. I do want to mention, and we're going to talk about it at the end of our conversation,
right,
that you're planning an incredible event for Monday. So I know that went out today. What's the third release you did today?
Is a statement welcoming an interview given by Tony Blinken, the deputy head of the National Security Council, of the United States, in which he said that any peace negotiations, any ceasefire agreement has to include demilitarization of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
This is something for which we have long pushed, because each time there's been an agreement, Hamas uses the lapsed time to rebuild, to rearm, to take in more and more sophisticated equipment, and to be able to expand their ability to manufacture long-range, short-range, medium-range missiles. And only by this call for demilitarization as being part of any ceasefire agreement, anything that leaves the terrorist capacity of Hamas intact will be a victory for them, will only come back to be visited on Israel, on Egypt, on other countries in the region. It will inspire other terrorists. But if they see that the international community lays the law down once and for all and says, when this shooting stops, Hamas, you have to disgorge your weapons and your terrorist infrastructure. You saw the horrific tunnels that they built, going a mile into Israel, a mile and a half into Israel, that they have 500 tons of concrete used in a single one of these tunnels. People don't know. They say, why don't they just destroy them? These are massive infrastructures, and many of them go under schools, mosques, apartment buildings. And Israel knows that if they destroy them, it could cause a chain reaction amongst all these tunnels. So they do only those that go into Israel. But think of it, all of the protests about humanitarian cement going into Gaza, complaining that, and Israel saying they use it for tunnels, they use it for launching pads. And everybody said, no, you have to do it, so they did it. And what did the Hamas use it for? For 50 tunnels, using 500 tons in each. Think of the massive amounts that were invested in these tunnels and in all this infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we called today and urged and applauded both his statement and urged others to join. Some of the European countries are now calling for disarmament of Hamas. It is a university recognized as a terrorist organization and can't be left intact to continue their murderous ways.
Well, Bo, it's one of the most positive things that could come out of this entire horrific event.
100%.
You talked about the tunnels, and you talked about how people have reacted. I had a conversation, which we will air tomorrow night on Shalom TV, with Michael Mukasey, who is a former Attorney General for the United States of America. And he was writing about the tunnels that you're describing and how that was really that's the real weapon that Hamas has against Israel. But during my conversation, Malcolm, I talked to him about what, as an Attorney General, what does he consider the law says about what constitutes a formal act of war. If North Korea were to fire one missile into South Korea, what is that? He said that's an act of war. And then he said, by the way, one missile from Hamas into Israel is an act of war. What bothers me, and I want you to comment on this, what bothers me is I don't hear this being explained anywhere in the American media. I don't hear anybody putting this event in the context of there was an aggressive act of war, a series of acts. This is one enormous act of war that Hamas has been perpetrating against the state of Israel for months and years. Israel has displayed extraordinary restraint, but Israel has the right, if they are under attack in a formal act of war, Israel has every right to defend itself. And if there are casualties, it's tragic, but it's not Israel's fault. Israel is responding to a formal act of aggressive war from Hamas into Israel. And my question for you, Malcolm, I know you agree. The question is, why wasn't the media saying it this way? And more to the point, why is it the American administration saying it? Why is the Congress of the United States saying it?
Well, the Congress of the United States has said it, but I think you're absolutely right that the media has completely distorted. And the ultimate expression, both of the hypocrisy of the United Nations and its misguidedness, is the fact that today the Human Rights Council authorized an investigation of Israel, not Hamas, and accusing them of looking at war crimes, looking at other charges, even though the head of the Human Rights Council said, well, that Hamas, by launching missiles, that's a war crime too, at civilians, from civilians, putting them in danger, but dismissing all the steps that Israel has taken to avoid civilian casualties and reverting to the same things it did with the Goldstone report, which was later repudiated, and which consequent events, I think, helped dismiss completely. And the UN's irrelevance gets underscored when they take steps like this. The building of these tunnels is a clear violation of international law and could constitute a war crime. The launching of missiles is 100% a war crime when you fire from civilian areas against civilian areas indiscriminately, no guidance, not targeting a military base even. It certainly violates international law because it's across a recognized international border. The attempts to kidnap people, the other steps that they have taken, and yet, what do we see? We see these portrayals of suffering in Gaza, which is real, but it's Hamas that caused it. It's Hamas that didn't invest in its people. Instead of putting the cement into schools and into buildings and into shopping centers, they put it into tunnels and used the money that they got instead of building the infrastructure and remember the greenhouses that were left for them and all things, and they used the piping there to build rockets. So there has to be clarity about this. We have to name the names. We have to call them for what they are, which is Islamist terrorists who are guided by one thing, and that's hegemony, that is imposing their way of life on Jews, on Christians, on Muslims who don't agree with them, and eliminating those who get in the way.
Yes.
We see it in Mosul now in Iraq, which is so outrageous. We see it in deporting the Christians and telling them you convert or you die. What they're doing to massive movements of Muslim populations in the face of ISIS, which is today in Gaza too. And Hamas is a sister organization to all of them.
Malcolm, you also have a big event planned for this coming Monday. Tell us about it.
On Monday, we're having a National Leadership Assembly where we're bringing leaders from across the United States together in Washington to hear from the leaders of Congress and administration to show our solidarity and support that this is across-the-board support for Israel at this difficult time, that we will show people coming from not only communities across the country but organizations from across the spectrum who are coming together in this common demonstration of unity within our community and with us, between us and the people of Israel, who stand today united behind the IDF and the government and its decisions. So do we. And this is going to be something that hasn't been done in many years, and I hope it will serve as a clarion call. We have also in New York, there's going to be a major demonstration at noon outside the Israeli consulate. So it's going to be a national day of action, and I hope everyone will participate fully, and as well as in the local events that are taking place everywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm. Malcolm, I remember so vividly being with you on the steps of the nation's capital. I have to be honest, I don't remember how many years ago. It was in April when you brought, basically America together as a rally in support of Israel. What year was that, Malcolm?
2009.
2009. I get chills as I remember it. Some fabulous speakers, and you were out of this world. You were the master of ceremonies of that event. This isn't similar to that, though, correct?
Pardon me?
This is not similar to that.
No, this is not a public rally. This is by invitation, because we want to make it clear that the leadership of the American Jewish community, plus non-Jews we are inviting leadership, will be making a common statement.
Wonderful.
The participatory rally will be in New York.
That's wonderful. Malcolm, we look forward to a follow-up conversation after that Monday. I thank you, as always, for giving us some time. From strength to strength, Malcolm, you do wonderful, wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well. Malcolm Hoenlein, who again is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Well, if you've been watching our daily coverage of the events confronting Israel, you know we've been highlighting the extent to which the story in the American media is severely anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. We played a clip yesterday from MSNBC's Morning Joe program, in which their reporter in Gaza, Ayman Moyaldin, was asked how Palestinians felt about being used as human shields. Ayman gave the Hamas line that there was no truth to the claim, and that Palestinians only consider their plight the result of Israeli aggression. What he was telling us, what this was telling me, was that in essence, MSNBC is not using their journalistic critical faculties when they're doing a story. And what bothered me most was that co-host Mika Brzezinski left Ayman's report go unchallenged, didn't ask one follow-up question. I want you to see that interchange one more time. Let's play it now.
The population being used as human shields. These are people who just want to live their lives. What can you tell us? What's your sense of the feeling among the population of Gaza, Gaza City, about this ongoing issue?
Well, that's also the specific allegation that we put towards Hamas leaders and asked them to address in terms of what has emerged, or at least the allegations made by Israel. The official response that has come out from Hamas's leaders in a statement exclusive to NBC News was they categorically denied any allegations. They said that there are journalists on the ground, the international community is watching. They have the right to go and freely ask Palestinians if they feel they're being used as human shields. They have repeatedly denied that in any way, shape, or form that the military wing of Hamas has placed its fighters in the vicinity of civilian institutions. Now, obviously, the United Nations last week documented a case where one UN school actually had in its vicinity rockets that were used in the fight against Israel. But when you go out into the streets, as we have been, and talk to ordinary Palestinians, their anger is not directed towards Hamas. They do not blame Hamas for what is happening here on the ground. They do not believe they're being used as human shields. The question that is ultimately at play among the ordinary Palestinians we've been speaking to is the amount of force that is being used by Israel. We've heard the Israeli argument that they're using precision strikes and surgical strikes, but the reality is we are seeing whole neighborhoods destroyed, we are seeing entire buildings collapsed, and we've seen at least 18 medical facilities that have been affected and damaged as a result of this. From the perspective of the Palestinian people, the only thing that is affecting their daily lives is what they say is the Israeli attack on Gaza at this point. It is not Hamas, who in their eyes, again in their eyes, say they are simply fighting and resisting Israel's aggressions on the Gaza Strip.
All right, Ayman, thank you very much.
Okay, Ayman, thank you very much. No follow-up question. No reference to the fact that international communities have documented the extent to which, lo and behold, Hamas is placing its weaponry in civilian neighborhoods. It maddens me. It just drives me mad. The fact that the American media never starts its news story with a proper context. And MSNBC can let their reporter talk about an Israeli massacre. Let him parrot the Hamas line with a straight face that Palestinians in Gaza say they're not human shields. Again, despite the fact that every news source reports the exact opposite. Despite the fact that our Secretary of State, John Kerry, has condemned Hamas for using civilians as human shields. Despite the fact that arms were literally found not near a school operated by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, but inside the school. Despite the fact that Hamas puts its missile batteries next to schools, hospitals, mosques. Still, MSNBC permits its reporter in Gaza to do a story on how Hamas officials deny the Israeli allegation without a single follow-up question. Too many in the American media reporting on the pain and suffering and death Palestinians are enduring now, but they never tell the real, honest story. The real story. The story is Hamas is responsible for every Palestinian casualty. Every single one. Hamas, not Israel, is responsible for every death in Gaza. Because Hamas not only initiated and caused the Israeli assault by engaging in acts of war against Israel, Hamas has made a conscious decision to extend its fighting and the suffering and the death. Hamas could end the Israeli air and ground operation any time it wants to, in a moment. All it has to do is accept a ceasefire. And every moment Hamas willfully extends the war, Hamas is guilty of every injury and death endured by Palestinians and Israelis alike. And this is the message that America needs to hear, the message Americans should be sending to the world loud and clear every day. It's the message that American media, including the New York Times and MSNBC and CNN and every other television network, that's the message they should be voicing every single day. Unfortunately, the message being broadcast is the virtual opposite, that Israel is the cause of Palestinian suffering and that Israel must stop its aggression against Gaza. And this is an insidious message that criminally distorts the truth and whips people into a frenzy against Israel. And let me say one more thing. Yesterday, Thane Rosenbaum, whom you've seen many times on Shalom TV, has been a regular moderator at the 96th Street Y, is a prolific author, a law professor, and has long been a human rights activist, has long been a critic of Israeli settlements. Thane Rosenbaum published a piece in yesterday's Wall Street Journal criticizing Hamas for using human shields and basically supporting Israel's attempt to stop the Hamas attacks on Israel. The hailstorm of vitriol, the meanest, ugliest kinds of slander and abuse and outright threats that Thane Rosenbaum has received. Students saying they will boycott his classes, protest in front of the school. Charges that Thane Rosenbaum supports the death of Palestinian babies and that he's no better than Osama bin Laden. This is how pro-Palestinians behave, how they see the issue, what they permit themselves to do and say because they believe Israel is evil. I don't care what your take is on this Israeli-Hamas clash. I don't care how much you care for Palestinian suffering or grieve at the deaths of Palestinian children. But by the way, any human being will grieve for the Palestinian pain. But the kind of hate speech you've just heard me refer to, this blatant attempt to prevent free speech, and the exchange of ideas and opinion, is horrific. Those who would suggest someone who disapproves of Hamas's using women and children as human shields and makes it public, that such a person supports the killing of Palestinian babies, those who say this are an embarrassment to this country, and they should be ignored by the media and by all of responsible American society. And the Thane Rosenbaums of America should be lauded and should be dialogued with if people think they're misguided. But this fascist behavior of those who mindlessly support a Hamas regime that engages in acts of war against a foreign nation, Israel, and then refuses a ceasefire when Israel accepts a ceasefire, it's reprehensible and should be condemned by every responsible voice on the American scene, beginning with every university administration in this country. And now for some more perspective on this the way in which the world is reacting to the Israeli-Hamas struggle. I am so pleased to have on our phones a dear friend, the director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, which is known as ISGAP, Charles Small. Charles, thank you so much for giving some time to us here on Shalom TV.
Hi, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Okay. Well, you heard some of what I just said, Charles, but I'd love you to give us an overview. You know, you are viewing every day the problem of anti-Semitism throughout the world, and by the way, the anti-Semitism you're seeing and that we're hearing about in Western Europe, in France and in England, is just blood-curdling. But I would like to know what your take is right now on the way in which the Israeli-Hamas struggle is being portrayed in the American media.
So, I was in Israel for 3 weeks, and I just came back on Sunday. So, being there is fresh in my mind and in my soul. And I have to say, I think what you were saying about Hamas is completely correct. I agree with you. If you read the Hamas Charter, they've incorporated the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the most pernicious form of anti-Semitism perhaps known ever, and they've incorporated it into their constitution, into their raison d'etre. And in their constitution, this is not the military wing or the extremist element of Hamas. This is the core foundational principles. They believe in not only destroying the state of Israel, they believe in killing, and they stated in their constitution, the killing of Jewish people. And that Jewish people, in their warped sense of religion and politics, they believe is responsible for all of the evil in the world. And then if you understand Hamas, you know that Hamas, the origins of Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt and has spread its tentacles in this country. It spread its tentacles in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and it even influenced the Shiite world and the regime in Iran. And I would argue that this reactionary form of Islam, I'm not speaking about Islam as a great religion or Muslim people, but radical political Islamist jihadi Islam, is a movement that is diametrically opposed to democracy, and we know they're straightforward and honest about what they want to do with the Jewish people. And in a recent article, I've called them the shock troops. They are the shock troops for the anti-Semites and the appeasers in the West. And we know, the New York Times knows, the governments of the Western world know what these people are doing. And I think it's time that we stand up as a community, and we stand up as a human rights community, and take a stand against this barbaric social movement. And we can't ignore the fact that Western governments are engaging them, and we need to put an end to that and speak out clearly about this.
You know, Charles, I understand everything you've said about the evil of Hamas. You say that the United States government and the governments of the world understand it. But I still want you to answer. Why don't we see this more clearly explained in the American media? What's behind it?
Because I think in the last several decades, that you can go back to, I don't want to get too philosophical or intellectual, but I think there was a movement, an intellectual movement in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It was sort of postmodernism and anti-colonialism and anti-racism, which certainly had important merits. But the works of people like Edward Said perceived the Palestinians as the underdog and those who were once colonized as the underdog, and we were supporting the underdogs. But what has happened in our universities and what's happened in our media, I'm speaking at a very basic level, is that those of us who criticize those who were once colonized are perceived as the enemy. And if we don't support the underdog, then we must be in favor of racism, we must be in favor of imperialism. So what's happened, there's almost a blind spot. It's almost a taboo among intellectuals and the media of record to look critically at what's happening. And it's a tragedy. So people who care about human rights, intelligent people, smart people committed to the rights of women, the rights of gay people, the rights of religious minorities, and justice, can't bring themselves to support Israel even when it's being attacked by a barbaric reactionary movement, because Israel is perceived in certain circles as racist, as an imperial Western entity in a foreign territory. So even when these people were attacking a synagogue in the center of Paris, the center of the country that brought enlightenment and democracy and liberté and égalité and fraternity, the foundation of Western democracy, even in the center of Paris when these barbarians, and the witnesses were saying, had murder in their eyes, or attacking a synagogue, I have not seen serious people, scholars, intellectuals, people of merit condemning this, because somehow the Jewish community is now part and parcel of the imperialist entity in the Middle East that the progressive, in quotations, people can't defend. And we've been discussing this for years, Mark, but I'm very alarmed, not only at the anti-Semitism on the streets of Paris or Berlin or London or Montreal and even in New York, but what disturbs me even more is the silence of our leaders, and it's a deafening silence. And I think our community can wake them up, and we must wake them up. And if President Obama, for example, was offended at the words of Mr. Sterling in a private conversation that was illegally recorded, in his racist rant, the President of the United States commented that he was personally insulted by Mr. Sterling's racism. Well, how do we feel as a community when the United States of America just provided $11 billion in military agreements with the government of Qatar, which is the home of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is supporting not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but supports Hamas? This is a regime that thinks that Jews are the descendants of animals and emanate from the urine of donkeys. So if the President of the United States is insulted by the rantings of a man having a relationship with a 20-year-old girl and says horrible racist things, then what are we as a community going to do about the fact that the government of this country is engaging with elements of the Brotherhood and working with them? What does this mean in terms of our principles as a democracy and our future as a community?
You know, you ask these questions in a rhetorical fashion, but they make a very strong point. And I really do want to get you into the studio to talk about the work you're doing in general, but also your uniquely perceptive view of how anti-Semitism is becoming endemic more and more around the globe. And Charles, I have said this before, I plead guilty to a certain kind of naivete where I thought after the Shoah, certainly Western Europe would never have that kind of anti-Semitism again. And I agree with you 1,000%. And I've said this already on Shalom TV, and right now it's sort of put on hold. But one of the things I think is very important for us to do is encourage American Jewish leadership and the American Jewish government to speak out strongly against every act of anti-Semitism, and the fact that the governments of Western Europe, while they say some things against it, are doing nothing to absolutely crack down once and for all on anti-Semitism. And what I say is, when we kept the slogan "Never Again" in the forefront of our consciousness, part of what "Never Again" should include is Jews who are in safety and with power should never again be silent when other Jews, when fellow Jews, when our family, when members of our family are in danger. And I feel that there has been a failure within American Jewry and within the American administration to somehow sort of just let this happen without making the kind of noise we can make and that we should make.
I agree, and also, truth be told, I think if you would have told me 12 or 13 years ago that I would be doing this work at this time and this stage of my life, I would not believe it.
Yes.
The issues of anti-Semitism is
yes.
snowballing into a major...
Okay. I want to ask you one more question before I have to let you go. You were dealt, in my mind, a sort of dirty blow by Yale when your Institute on Anti-Semitism had a standing at Yale for a period of years, and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under you. And I believe the charges were trumped up, that your institute was not academic enough, which is just ludicrous when you see the kind of people and papers it produces. Now, fortunately for you, you have done, you have risen from the, like a phoenix. You have risen, Charles, and ISGAP is far stronger and is virtually global. I am so proud of you, and I'm so happy for you, and the work you're doing with ISGAP is so important. The Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. But you have an understanding of how universities can be very vicious. And we're seeing this right now in the case of Thane Rosenbaum, whom you know. And Thane Rosenbaum wrote a piece that he published in the Wall Street Journal where he was critical of Hamas's use of human shields in their war against Israel. And it has been horrific what Thane has had to endure ever since writing that piece. And the suggestion is that he is not only, not only will students protest and not attend his classes, that he in some way supports the murder of Palestinian babies. But what also has happened, and this is what I want you to speak about, the university community seems to be critical of him rather than being supportive of this concept of free speech and Thane's ability to express an opinion, which people can disagree with and debate, but he should not be sort of ruled out of bounds because he went public with his opinion. And again, this is a guy who has been associated with liberal causes on the left his whole career. But I want you to in any way, say anything you can about how you empathize with Thane, and is there a lesson you think we should be learning here?
Well, there's definitely a lesson. I'll just very briefly tell you. You're the first person I'm actually telling to, certainly publicly. There's 2 or 3 people in my office that know. But as of a few hours ago, we actually finalized an agreement with the Sorbonne in Paris and the CNRS, which is the most prominent research center in France. So we're going to be starting our programming there in the autumn. So
at the Sorbonne?
Yes. So
Mazal Tov. That's fabulous, Charles. Okay, keep going. And you're breaking
well.
the story on Shalom TV.
Yeah, so breaking news. But I would say what's happening to Professor Rosenbaum is a symptom of a deep problem. And this problem exists in the finest academic institutions in the country and also in the finest media outlets, the media outlets of record. And it's even coming into the Metropolitan Opera in New York,
yes,
in the Center, among the finest institutions of culture in the world. This narrative of demonizing Israel, and through demonizing Israel, we are demonizing the Jews in the diaspora. And for the American Jewish community, we have to understand that the demonization of the Israel, regardless of what you think and feel about Israel, is the demonization of the Jewish people and our notion of peoplehood. So what's happening, what happened to me at Yale, what happened to Professor Rosenbaum just the last day, is symptomatic of contemporary anti-Semitism. Israel is being demonized, and anybody who defends or speaks out against the annihilation of the Jewish people somehow, in some circles, is actually becoming an enemy, becoming not a scholar but an advocate. And this is the problem that we have to deal with. It's a serious problem, and I think we have to show resolve and speak very clearly as a community, and to use our resources and to use our, we have friends in this struggle, and to reach out to our friends. It should be noted that the government of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, for example, have common interest with the government of Israel in defeating the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. And I think that we have to speak out loud and clear, and we should support for Professor Rosenbaum for not only being able to speak out, but his article is fantastic, and he's right.
Yes, that's right.
The head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar just said today, a few hours ago, in a speech, that Hamas should not end its rockets and that all Muslims around the world should join Hamas to liquidate the Jewish people. This is a few hours ago. And this rhetoric is in our finest institutions, and it's now even in our streets, and we have to wake up and understand the problem, take time to find our bearings, to understand what the problem is, and then to develop, as a collective, policies and solutions to combat this. I think we can, but we have to be very rational and very sober, evaluate the situation, and as a community come together, discuss ways to move this forward.
You're the best, Charles. You know I love you. I want you in studio. Now that you're back from Israel, maybe we'll find some time to get you in the studio and talk. You're doing fabulous work, and it is wonderful for you to share your perspective and insight on Shalom TV. Thank you, my friend, very much.
Thank you. It's a great honor again to be with you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Charles Small, Director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. So as we wrap up this hour, by the way, do you know that today is Shimon Peres's last day as president of the State of Israel, and he'll be giving a speech in the Knesset tomorrow night. But he's had a very interesting career. You know, this man who's now heading into 91 years old, a lifetime of service to the Jewish people in the State of Israel. You may like him, you may not like him, you think he's made mistakes, but he became a beloved elder statesman of the State of Israel. He is really something very, very special, and especially, again, in the later years of his life, how beloved he became. And we will miss him. I still hope he lives many, many years, 120, but we'll miss him. And he met with Secretary of State Kerry, and the Secretary arrived in Israel and met with the President. I believe he also met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we'll be able to deal with that. But anyway, a fond farewell and Yasher Koach to Shimon Peres. We didn't get a chance to take your phone calls on this hour. We'll be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, make a note, with a 2-hour live special from 9 to 11 p.m. right here on Shalom TV. And then we will invite you to share your own comments on the telephone. Tonight at 9 p.m., I want to invite you to watch Mark Langfan, a fascinating program on the geography and topography of the West Bank and what it says about how peace might be worked out or maybe problematic with the Palestinian people. And that program will be on at 9 tonight, at midnight tonight, and tomorrow at 3 p.m. Then we'll be on again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Immediately following this live telecast on Shalom TV. Now we're live between 3 and 4 p.m. I'll be getting in my car, driving with my wife Ruth up to Stamford, Connecticut, to share in a Fairfield County-wide rally of support for the people of Israel. And for any of you who are unable to be physically present at a community gathering in solidarity with Israel, I want you to know that we'll be airing tonight at 6:30 p.m. a wonderful gathering that took place this past Sunday at the 92nd Street Y in New York City, organized by the IAC, the Israeli American Council, together with the JCRC of New York and the UJA Federation of New York. And I talked about this event with you, which again my wife and I attended on Sunday. It was very moving, with some fabulous words from the Israeli Consul General in New York, Ido Aharoni, with a message from New York Senator Chuck Schumer. And he was adamant in his pro-Israel stance, very, very well-spoken. Congressman Elliot Engel and the chairman of the President's Conference, Bob Sugarman. So if you're not going to be at a rally somewhere this evening, share a moment of solidarity with the people of Israel tonight right here on Shalom TV at 6:30 p.m. And we'll be replaying that for you throughout the evening and tomorrow morning at 11:30 p.m., 3:30 a.m., and tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. and at 12:30 p.m. My thanks, as always, to a fabulous staff who worked very hard to put this hour together. Sloan Copeland, our director, just marvelous job. And Serge Goldberg, who production coordinator, again, just what you do is unbelievable, both of you. To Dara Golub, the associate director of Shalom TV, wonderful, helped produce this edition of our Israel in Turmoil. And to producers Carol Lilienthal, Ron Jacobson, to Tisha Bader, who does fabulous work for us in the news department here at Shalom TV, and in Master Control, Mark Baker and Corey Sivakov. All of you, fabulous job. We are all so appreciative. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.